της κτήσεως, ο καιρός και χρόνος εν τη Δία εξουσία θέμενος, ευλόγησον τον Στέφανον του ενιαυτού της Χριστότητος σου, Κύριε, φυλάτων εν ειρήνη τους βασιλείς και την πόλη σου, πρεσβείες της Θεοτόκου και σώσον ημάς.
Dear friends, this year we were much blessed to celebrate the Indiction, the first day of the ecclesiastical new year on a Sunday. Most times in the US, this service is omitted, especially as it coincides with Labor Day and the period of vacation for many. The beginning of the ecclesiastic new year is also the end of the previous one, and this is a good day to reflect on what was harvested and to plan on what to seed going forward. This is no different for our School of Byzantine Music, and today's podcast is different than the previous ones. Today, we will consider the person of Psaltis, cantor, as a trinity. We proposed that the cantor is triadic in the substance of hymnodist artist, teacher, and psychagogos, which will be defined. Three substances in perfect union and oneness. To consider this, today we will host two special guests. But before we begin discussing the topic, it is important, we think, to give an overview of what the Indiction is and what was celebrated and sung on Sunday, the 1st of September. The word indiction comes from the Latin indictio, which translates into to define, to set, to establish, to order. The term came from the custom of the Roman emperors to establish by statute for a period of 15 years the amount of the annual tax collected at that time for the maintenance of the army. By extension, these 15-year cycles that began under the Roman Emperor Augustus Caesar, 3 years after the birth of Christ, were also called indictions. From the beginning of the 4th century AD, September was also established as the beginning of the ecclesiastical as well as the political year, because September 1st coincided with the beginning of the Indiction. Since September is a time of harvest and preparation for the new cycle of vegetation, it was fitting that Christians celebrate the beginning of the agricultural season by giving thanks to God for his favor to creation. It is what the Jews already did according to the commandments of the Mosaic Law. That is, on the first day of the 7th Jewish month, the beginning of September, they celebrated the feast of Neomenia, or trumpets, during which they were freed from all work to offer burnt sacrifices as a sweet smell to the Lord, according to Leviticus 23:18. Christ, the Son and Logos of God, the creator of time and the universe, wanted to recapitulate in himself the physical world and the written law. Thus, on this day, when nature is preparing to run a new cycle of seasons, we celebrate the event when our Lord Jesus Christ entered the synagogue and, opening the book of Isaiah, read the passage where the prophet speaks in the name of the Savior. Spirit of the Lord upon me, anoint me, evangelize the poor, send me, proclaim the year of the Lord accepted, in Luke 4:18. Originally, most calendars in the eastern part of the Roman Empire held the new year on September 24, the day of the autumnal equinox. However, since September 23rd was the birthday of the Roman Emperor Octavian, the new year was moved to the 24th of the same month, a day which was fixed as the beginning of the Indiction, the period, that is, of the Roman tax decree that was valid for 15 years. Thus, the Indiction in the Eastern Roman Empire came to mean the new year. The developing early Christian church in the eastern part of the empire found itself inside the cycle and gave it a special meaning and context, particularly as it coincided with the establishment of the conception of St. John the Forerunner, the key event that bridges the Old with the New Testament. In 462 AD, for practical reasons, but also to have a coincidence of the first of the year with the first of the month, the ecclesiastical new year was moved to September 1st. With the consideration of the harvest and the planning of a new vegetative period, it is natural to understand why the Eastern Church, led by His All Holiness Patriarch Bartholomew, designated the ecclesiastic new year, September 1st, to be a special day dedicated to the natural environment.
Μαθώντες κάθε κάστην ημέραν βοήσομεν το κτίστη Πάτερ ημών ο εν της ουρανής κατοικών των επιουσίων άρτων δίδου ημίν παρορώνιμον τα πτέσματα. Αξίος κατεστρώτη ούτως τένιν ταος ταουδίας κορπιστον τον πισεύουν και απίστων αγαρινών ψαλμικούς παρακονάδι πισέ.
Dear friends, on account of the first week of the ecclesiastic new year in the Orthodox Christian tradition, the school thought it helpful to devote this new spiritual and ecclesiastical beginning to the view that the Psaltis, the cantor, is in fact a triadic person. We propose that the cantor is triadic in the substance of hymnodist, artist, teacher, and guide of the soul. Three substances in perfect union and oneness. Today, the podcast welcomes the Archon music teacher of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and director of the School of Byzantine Music of the Archdiocese, Mr. Georgios Theodoridis. We welcome the Reverend Father Dr. Romanos Karanos, Proistamenos of the Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church in Brockton, Massachusetts, Adjunct Assistant Professor of Byzantine Liturgical Music, Director of the Byzantine Music Program at Holy Cross Seminary of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America, and Spiritual Advisor to the School of Byzantine Music of the Archdiocese, and my leastness to consider this holistic triadic view of the cantor. My dear brother in Christ, George, when the great Protopsaltis Emmanouelides was asked, "What is the principal determinant of an excellent cantor?" he replied, three things: voice, voice, and voice. Hatzimarkos, as we all appreciate, was one of the great cantors of the 20th century and defined at least three generations of cantors. George, can you share your views on one of the triadic substances of a cantor? That is, the cantor as a hymnodist, a person of the fine arts, if you wish, an artist.
Thank you, Nick. First and foremost, please accept my gratitude for the tremendous material that you have produced over the past 18 months for our podcasts. I really appreciate this new initiative, and I welcome this new initiative of including other individuals in the conversation and really share ideas and share thoughts about and on the topic of the Psaltic art. To respond to your question about the artistry, the Psaltis as an artist, I would like to share a personal story, actually 2 personal stories, and then my input, if you want, on this topic. The first story is actually related to both the word artist and the late Emmanouelides Katsimarkos that you referenced earlier. When I was receiving my music diploma in Athens, Emmanouelides Katsimarkos was in the exam committee, and to honor him, I chanted one of his compositions, and in particular the Thearchio Nevmati, the Vesperal Doxastikon of the Dormition of the Theotokos, the Octaikon Doxastikon, and I performed it on the pitch that he wrote it, on Ke. And let me tell you, it was very technical and it was very demanding, as you know, but I think I got the best compliment afterwards, which I don't know if it had to do with the particular Doxastikon or my repertoire performance in general. Everyone in the committee shared their thoughts and gave me their comments and some instructive criticism as well. But Emmanouelides Katsimarkos referred to me as a kalitechni. He said to all, "Avtos είναι kalitechnis." So in other words, he referred to me as an artist. He said, "This guy is an artist." Now, of course, this has a double side, in my opinion. The first would be, as an artist, you are referred to as a free spirit, as a creative person. But on the other hand, how much of an artist can you be on the chant stand? Can you be as a psalti, as a servant of the sacred service, a concelebrant of the priest? Wouldn't that mean that the priest is an artist as well? Because the priest also sings in music, under a spectrum of modal theses, if we break it down. And of course, the answer is yes, they're both artists. But what I'm trying to explain is that by creating art or by rendering pieces that are artistic already or full of artistry to begin with, is another way of being a servant of this art. So being an artist is one thing, but serving the art makes you rather a servant of the art, which gives it a more giving character rather than performative, I guess, character. Now, in my opinion, this art that you refer to is the perception of music as well as the vocal abilities. Both of these things I personally consider gifts from God. So by really performing in an eloquent way and serving the Psaltic art in a professional manner, in a sense, is a way of manifestation of this God-given gift. In other words, just like the parable of the Lord giving talents or golden coins to the servants, and only one of them really multiplied them, is the same thing to me. We as psaltists / artists should not hold back when we chant, either for 5 people or for Holy Week when we have 1,000 people in the church, by performing this sacred art in the most eloquent way is an expression of artistry. And it is also a manifestation and a thanksgiving to God who gave you this talent. And the personal aspect of this is, when I was asked about exactly this thing, that why do you do the full Hierovikon in such a grandiose manner? It's a Wednesday and it's a feast day of a saint, and we have like 5 people in the church. Now, of course, there are so many things we can talk about, 5 people or 7 people or 1,000 people in the church, but I'm not trying to take over any theological aspects of this, but I would rather say that my response was, God gave me a gift. If I hold back just because I want to preserve my voice, let's say because I have a busy schedule ahead of me, or because my talent and my time is not worth to be shared with only 5 or 6 people, but rather only with 1,000, eventually, when the time comes and I will not be able to share this gift or perform the Psaltic art in an eloquent way, or in any way really, if this stops to be the case, what have I shared from this talent? How different am I from the servant who dug a hole and put the golden coin in the dirt just to preserve it? No different at all. So at the very end, if we are going to do it the right way as Psaltis, we might as well do it in both an artistic and also in a faithful and prayerful way.
George, can you define what practice and what training should, in your experience, and speaking to the Psalti of old time, who you've met in your life, what training should go into making a cantor into a person of the fine arts? And by fine arts, I do not mean, of course, the movie theater or a musical stage, but a fine arts, in other words, being able to provide clarity in voice, clarity in diction, pronunciation. What training should a developing cantor go through in order to attain these objectives?
Well, plain and simple, I think any training would be beneficial when you are engaged in an art form that requires physical action and full body involvement. As you know, a Psaltis has to stand for several hours. The Psaltis needs to be able to navigate through several books, to even at certain times conduct others and direct others. But the main deliverable, if you want, of a Psaltis is to be able to perform without getting exhausted and without losing their voice. And in order to achieve that, of course, there is training involved, and there must be training involved. Although another point here to be made is that there is a particular motion, school of thought, if you want, that prohibits any Western-like training, even if this training would eventually preserve your overall health. And to draw from my personal experience, I was told when I was very young from individuals, Psaltis, who used to tell me, don't get into that whole opera style vocal technique nonsense, because you will eventually lose your Byzantine ethos, your Byzantine style. I did, however, register with a vocal coach at the conservatory where I was teaching, because I could hear others from the classroom next door singing their hearts out on ranges, on vocal ranges that I couldn't imagine as a psalti in the past. So much so that once I enrolled in the class, I had a non-psalti teacher, a female teacher, mind you, who told me for the first time that I was not a baritone, I was not a bass, but I was a so-called lyrical tenor, which basically means that I have a wide range that I just have not unfolded yet, that I have not accessed yet. And these 4 years with my dear teacher Penny were basically years of illumination, if you want, of letting loose and be free. Of course, the vocal exercises in order to extend my vocal range were not similar to any Byzantine music style thesi, but it helped me to really extend, to really, as we say, push the boundaries on what can and can't be done. But I think most importantly, what really benefited me from these vocal lessons, this vocal training, was not so much the extension or the enhancement of qualitative notes on a wide range, but rather the ability to properly breathe, and not breathe in terms of reading a poem and breathing at the right pauses and at the right punctuation, but rather to, even when talking, breathing the proper way and using your voice in the right way, and as you know, the diaphragm as well, utilizing your diaphragm so as to not lose your voice during Holy Week or getting hoarse even after one single presentation of an hour. And I know that because Penny had students that were not singers. There were lawyers and teachers who literally after a full school day would come back home hoarse. And of course, this was very difficult for them for their professional life because they weren't able to perform their duties. But back to the psaltiki now, back to the musical performance, I realized that through these diaphragm exercises, these breathing exercises, I accomplished to use my full body as a vessel, if you want, to not only perform on a wider range, vocal range, but most importantly, to utilize 100% of my breath to produce any particular note. Sometimes we hear people singing very loud and then becoming very breathy. I don't know how exactly to say that in English, but using more air in the higher notes, or certain people use more air in the lower notes. With that vocal training, with that breathing techniques, you should be able to eventually reach a level of performing any note with the full extent of your breath. So in other words, putting everything into a lower note and into a higher note. Now, of course, the range of notes where you can utilize your voice 100% now is somewhat limited. But that doesn't mean that you can't access higher or lower notes. And I personally benefited extremely from the vocal lessons. And again, as I said, most especially from the breathing techniques that allowed me to perform actually several Holy Weeks. Because as a kid from the diaspora, as you know, I was born and raised in Germany, I was tasked with performing Holy Week and Pascha in several churches in Germany, because not everyone had a psalti or a priest. So I was traveling with the priest to 3 and 4 communities just to do Holy Monday, Holy Tuesday, Holy Wednesday, and so forth. And I even jokingly said that I was one of the few who achieved resurrecting the Lord 4 times in one day. And that is because we celebrated a Pascha without the liturgy in all the communities. But I chanted the Paschal service, the resurrectional service, starting at 10, at 11, and then at the third community at 12 o'clock, then with the full divine liturgy.
In terms of the fine arts, George, being able to read poetically, certainly in the context of ecclesiastical hymnology, has been said to be very important. Just like everybody who goes into schools of drama or schools of art, there is a phase in their training that they actually read poetry. And they get on stage and they recite poetry. They learn how to accent the syllables appropriately, but also in a lyrical fashion. Do you believe that it's important for developing cantors, say the night before a service or a few nights before a service? In America, with a few exceptions, we are not in church every day. Do you believe it is important and relevant for cantors to look at the metered hymns? For example, the canon, for example, the Prosomoia, and learn how to first read them in a lyrical manner to be able to get a feeling of the meter, and if that also helps their ability at the analogion to then musically define this lyricism. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think that you already answered your own question, but let me elaborate a little bit, especially on the Avtomela. I believe that the Avtomela, or the parallagi, the written Avtomela, should only be utilized for educational purposes, at least once. But essentially, the Avtomela should be taught orally. Yes, of course, we can always reference the written compositions of the Avtomela, but at the end of the day, the Avtomela are so commonly encountered in our services that essentially the Psaltis has to learn them by heart. And another historic, if you want, anecdote from teachers of old is the following. When Konstantinos Pringos and Athanasios Panagiotidis were traveling by train to participate and celebrate a Vesper service, the Vesper service, I believe, of St. Nicholas of Myra, Pringos being, of course, the senior, the psalti with seniority, asked Panagiotidis to hand him a Mineon. The Mineon, of course, the book where he would find all the hymns of that particular feast day. And he studied, Konstantinos Pringos studied the Vesper service of St. Nicholas. And of course, Panagiotidis, he admired, of course, his engagement. But at the end of the day, as he realized, it was much more than that. Once they arrived at that village and they were about to start the Vesper service, Konstantinos Pringos asked the other assistants on the chant stand to remove all books from the chant stand. And afterwards, he performed the Vesper service by heart. Of course, we as experienced chanters know Kyrie ke kraxa ke kragaria and maybe some doxastika by heart, or even the entrance hymns, the Fosilaron for Vespers. Some of us even know the Alexandaria by heart. But these are the immovable parts of the Vesper service. The actual hymnology of the feast day is in the Mineon. So during the trip, the train ride from, I believe it was Thessaloniki to a other village of northern Greece, Konstantinos Pringos prepared the hymns that he was supposed to chant, and he memorized them. So, in other words, I think that preparing a particular hymn or a set of hymns for the Sunday, for the upcoming Sunday, or any feast day really, is, I will dare to say, even more important than studying the paralagi, the notation, the night before. And that is because while you know what the text says when you read it to yourself, you read it and you realize, yeah, okay, I understand what it says, but it's a total different exercise, if you want, to read it as telling the story to somebody else. Eventually, you will learn the notation and you will follow the music faithfully, but how much of this performance is actually, again in quotation marks, telling the story? Recitation in the Psaltic art, in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, has a particular way of rendering. We either use the kliton or we use a simple plagal fourth mode scale to recite in a melodic way, if you want. I think we would refer to it as a melodic recitation. But besides that, once you read the hymn that you have to eventually perform musically, I think you have a better way of expressing it and accentuate at the right place, even if the musical score does not support this particular accentuation. And by that, I don't mean a particular word, I mean a whole phrase. As St. Basil the Great teaches, and I'm quoting here, let the tongue sing and let the mind search out the meaning of what is being said, so that you sing with the spirit and sing with the understanding also. Do not think that God needs this. Rather, he wants to make you worthy to be glorified. This is a homily of St. Basil the Great on Psalm 27. So to conclude my thought, I believe it is essential, fundamental, crucial to prepare, to train, not only vocally, but most especially contextually, to really grasp the context as well as the meaning of the hymns to be performed, so as to perform not only from the heart, but also from a standpoint of confidence. And of course, with all that preparation and training, the Psaltis would be disseminating, delivering the story, the word, in a much more eloquent and artistic way.
George, there are, shall we say, views of the application. There are views of how Byzantine chant can be considered as a fine art, and they cut along a line between pietism and celebration. And that you mentioned the word celebration is very important, because there are those who say that we should be chanting in a pietistic manner, in a manner that one might consider self-flagellating. And then there is what we have experienced and what we have heard in old reel-to-reel tape and cassette tapes and CDs and live from the chanters of old time, who seem to be quite celebrational, not bombastic. There, of course, being bombastic is an exaggeration of celebration, but they are celebrational at the Analogium. So what are the thoughts in the context of a fine artist in church between a pietistic expression of the hymns versus a more celebrational one? Because even Holy Week is in its own way celebrational, the victory of life over death. If that's not a celebration, what is? And so what are your thoughts in the context of the fine arts context of this division between a pietistic expression versus a celebrational, which does not mean bombastic, of course?
I think you're cornering me here with that question. It is indeed a larger conversation, but I think it narrows down to two simple things. First would be the environmental aspect of Psaltiki, and the other one would be the time period of the ecclesiastical cycle. First, about the environmental aspect of Psaltiki. If you have ever experienced a Mount Athos vigil, if you have ever experienced a divine liturgy or any service really on Mount Athos, which of course is the center of Greek Orthodox monasticism, and the chanting there is environmental. What do I mean by that? The monks, all day long and all night long, Apofylakis πρωίας μέχρι νυκτός, from the morning watch until night, chant and participate in sacred services. One might argue that that's their job. Of course, this is a very secular approach. It's not their job, it's their purpose. So they chant in a much different way than the kosmikon typikon. I wouldn't call it pietistic. I wouldn't call it bombastic. I wouldn't call it different school. I would call it environmental. The reason monks in monasteries and nuns in monasteries chant a certain way is because they indeed chant for the glory of God, yes, for their salvation, of course, but it is a daily task. It is their whole purpose to chant the glory of God, as we said earlier, right? To glorify, to give thanks, and so on. This distinguishes this style of chanting automatically from the rest of the world. Monastic chanting is different. Why? Again, because environmentally speaking, the Psaltis of a parish in a city or in a village, again, different environment, might or might not chant for the salvation of his or her soul, but the main purpose of having a psalti in a church is to accommodate the prayerful, as I said before, to tell the story, to facilitate the congregational prayer, okay? So the way a psalti chants in church naturally cannot be the same way that monks and nuns chant in monasteries. Both glorify God, both offer a supplication to God, but they serve a different purpose. Now, does that mean that parish churches in the secular world are less religious than monasteries? Of course not. They serve different purposes, different people. And I believe there are both practical as well as spiritual reasons for that. That does not mean, however, that either style, either the monastic, I believe that the monastic you're referring to would be the pietistic. And of course, pietistic is such an ugly term to use for the psaltiki, because by calling it pietistic, by giving it this adjective, by using that term, we automatically assume that it is not truthful, or it is not from the heart, but it is rather pietistic. So it is pretend chanting. So to conclude this thought, I believe that any style of Byzantine music or the Psaltic art are acceptable as long as they serve their initial purpose. Just as we don't want a monastery to become too secular and too modernized, in the same way we can't accept a parish to become a monastery or give us a monastery-like sense by chanting in, as you refer to it, in a pietistic manner. Now, in regard to the second point of, we said it's there's an environmental aspect, and then there is the seasonal aspect. We do have in our tradition in the ecclesiastical cycle seasons of compunction and seasons of celebration. So during Holy Week, for example, in regard to the music, the whole repertoire, as magnificent and technical as it might be in terms of the style and and patterns that are utilized, we would call that kataniktiko. We even have specific Vespers on Sundays that we call kataniktiki esperini. So it is not the megas esperinos, the great Vespers, which is by definition celebratory, panegyrikos esperinos, panegyrical, right? So in terms of the seasonal labels, if you want, our services are characterized by that. Then we also have certain labels such as Archon και metamelus, or we call the trisagion at the end of the doxology to asmatikon, the asthmatic, meaning more elaborate. Now, it doesn't really say on how to chant it in terms of more festive or louder or softer, but in itself, the piece, by the range of notes it utilizes, can tell you if it's a panegyrikon or a kataniktikon. During Holy Week, as I said before, all the hymns, as magnificent as they might be, they don't necessarily have a great range, with the exception of course, certain key pieces of Holy Week. They hold a very contrite character. So to complete my thought, both styles are acceptable, are good, but we just can't utilize one in the realm of the other.
George, one last question for this first, if you will, substance of a triadic cantor. There are innovations in expression. There are innovations in interpretation. There are those that have entered what one might call the received modern tradition, if I can call it that. Example, case in point, istomnima of third mode, for example. And then there is a skeleton, shall we say, an innovation skeleton that was first heard 60, 70 years ago. And then that skeleton has been, shall we say, embellished and reinvented and refashioned and reshaped. In the context of the fine artist serving at the Hymnologium, what are your thoughts about what is innovation and to what degree does innovation fit inside the received tradition?
Well, I think, my dear Nick, first of all, we have to distinguish what this received tradition is, given that, and I'm sure you and Father Romanos would agree, the tradition that someone receives is somewhat subjective. It is not objective. The objective tradition is basically what we heard from the earliest recordings of Byzantine music, from the Phanar, from Constantinople, by the late Iakovos Nafpliotis, the Archon Protopsaltis of the Great Church of Christ. We do have recordings of him chanting Holy Week hymns as well as paraklesis. Now, he would be considered the continuation of the teachers of old, of Constantinople, where Byzantine music really flourished and was cultivated and essentially spread throughout the Eastern and Western world. Now, of course, having said that, there are folklore elements, if you want, territorial elements or filters through which the Psaltiki has been filtered through and kept certain elements of that particular area. But the expression, the theses, the patterns, as we say, are the same. But let me elaborate on that later. For now, let me address this particular sticheron that you mentioned in your example. And I know it's just an example, but it is indeed one of the most popular stichera that we as students, I remember myself when I was younger, used to share with each other back in the day with, of course, cassette tapes, and then later on with CDs that we got from the older generation who gave us tapes, and then we made CDs out of them and then shared them with each other. Yes, indeed, this piece, first of all, gives you that liberty of this innovation. But again, it's a tricky thing, this innovation, because innovation still, in my book at least, is subject to a particular set of rules, to if you want, a set of values that can't just be diminished for the sake of innovation and showcasing our talent. And in regard to showcasing our talent, I think it's even more important that to mention that it's not so much problematic that someone opts to really put in his heart and his whole fantasia into innovating in that piece, but the fact that we have the urge to sing that piece on a Sunday of third mode, even if this piece is not even appointed to be chanted on that day. Because, as you know, most Sundays we sing the resurrectional troparia and stichera, and there's always either a feast day or a saint that we're celebrating. And in the case of the praises, we would then sing 4 resurrectional stichera and then 4 of the saint or of the feast day, sometimes even 10. So it is actually very rare that we get to the 7th Sticheron, which is the Istomnimas Epizitisen. And my issue now with this is, why would you drag the Sticheron all the way from the 7th place and chant it in the 3rd place? Now, I don't really understand the reason behind that, other than we have the need to really sing this piece because it means a lot, and because, as we said, it is very popular, and we barely have the opportunity to sing it. And we will stick with that story, that it is out of the eagerness and the desire of the Psaltis to have the opportunity to chant it. Now, in addition to the innovative desire that a Psaltis has, innovation itself, if it's without boundaries. Now, of course, most of the time, these extremities and, as you said, bombastic expressions of vocal abilities could attract unnecessary attention. And speaking of unnecessary attention, Father Romanos Karanos shared a beautiful article with me once, and I'll be happy to hear more if you ask him to elaborate on that as well. The article basically stated, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it in front of me, that when you enter the Eastern Orthodox worship, both the priest and the Psaltis should be invisible. Of course, we're not talking about any magical disappearing going on during the service, but rather that by performing the service properly, I will dare to say professionally, in a pious but not pietistic way, we would not attract unnecessary attention, but rather have the faithful participate in an experience rather than a show or an entertainment or a concert. And to complete my response to you about the received tradition, we covered the innovation, we covered the paying tribute to the teachers of old, which is another way of honoring the tradition, absolutely. I will give you another example now on how this preserving of the tradition, and in this case, the tradition is in quotation mark, can be a double-edged sword. And I'm referring to the anaphora of St. Basil the Great that was recorded by Thrasivoulos Stanitsas, the great, the magnificent Archon Protopsaltis of the Great Church of Christ, who has a recording. There is a recording of him, rather, available online when he performs the anaphora of St. Basil the Great. As you know, this particular anaphora is chanted in a very specific mode, in a specific way, in a specific tempo. Now, in this case, the recording would rather give you rapid heartbeats and probably give you anxiety as well, because especially the episicheri at the end is, in my opinion, at least in my professional opinion, a little too fast. And again, the magnificent, the great, like no other, second to none, Thrasivoulos Stanitsas, who is being studied as we speak, even nowadays, on how he was able to keep the same pitch and the same tempo in all of his performative activities without the help of any technical support, or sometimes even without any Socrati chanting next to him. So yes, an absolute cornerstone of our contemporary Byzantine music tradition. However, this anaphora is just not what should be considered a received tradition. It should be considered as one rendition of this particular set of anaphora. Now, the reasons, because you might wonder, okay, so you're saying we should not listen to Stylianos because he's wrong? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that in this particular example that I just gave, probably the main celebrant of that divine liturgy of St. Basil the Great was in a rush, or the Archon did not want to be interrupted while performing the anaphora, and this is why he sped it up and put in, as we jokingly say, in turbo mode. Now, having said that, we can still extract a lot of information about the intervals and about the performative quality of this magnificent man and psalti of our time.
Dear friends, straddling the first and third substance of a psaltis that will be presented by Father Romanos is that of the teacher. I would like to share my thoughts on this substance of a triadic cantor. The basis of a good teacher are the virtues. In Greek, we refer to the word aretes. Virtue can be defined as conformity of life and conduct with the principles of morality. Virtues, therefore, are the practices and habits which are followed out in accord with these principles. Four natural or cardinal virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance, are seen as the hinges on which other virtues can be cultivated. This concept of virtue is discussed by Socrates, found in Plato and Aristotle, adopted by Roman writers, and taken over by many distinguished Christian fathers. The fathers add the virtues of faith, hope, and agape, giving preference to the greatest of the three, agape, or love. While Greek thought saw the virtues as somehow innate to the nature of mankind, the Christian writers attributed them to God's revelation through Christ. Virtue is always the just balance between excess and defect. Virtues can be acquired by the cultivation of regular actions which build up to a habit. If we examine the writings of the fathers on virtues and we consider them in the context of what is a good teacher, the pillars of a good teacher are the following: humility, prudence, patience, gentleness, zeal, piety, and generosity. I would like to summarize some important aspects of these virtues in the context of how they shape a good teacher. Humility is a virtue which inspires us with low sentiments of ourselves. It attributes to us our just due. It makes us realize what we are, according to these words of the Apostle Paul, "What have you that you have not received? And if you have received it, why glory in it?" 1 Corinthians 4:7. Thus, it directly opposes pride, which gives us an unjustly exalted notion of our own excellence. Yet in truth, this vice does not indicate any solid good in us, for it is only a swelling which puffs us up and makes us appear in our judgment greater than we really are. The humility of a good teacher must be Christian. Hence, the teacher will be faithful to what she or he owes God and to what is owed to not only superiors, but also to equals and inferiors. Humility is accompanied by modesty. Humility excludes all vainglory as a motive of acting. Humility is without ambition. It eliminates jealousy. It makes a teacher glad to share knowledge with the simple. The teacher shows great zeal in instructing the beginner as well as the more advanced. The humility of a good teacher makes them charitable, affable, obliging, and easy to approach. Prudence is a virtue which makes us understand what we need to do and what we need to avoid. Since the good teacher's aim is education, prudence enlightens her or him about the means to use to bring them up properly by educating their minds and hearts. Hence, this virtue is highly to be esteemed. It is even a most excellent art, says St. John Chrysostom, because, as he adds, a good teacher stands far above a clever painter, a skillful sculptor, and other similar artists, from which we may conclude that to such a one especially we may apply the words of Holy Scripture, "Happy the man rich in prudence." Patience is a virtue which makes us overcome without murmuring and with submission to the will of God all the imperfections of this life, and especially the cares inseparable from the education of youth. The teacher is nearly always one with the students. This virtue consists in supporting the disagreeable and unpleasant occurrences which may be met during the course of teaching. The teacher never grows disheartened or weary from repeating the same things to the students, often and at length, but always does so with goodness and affection, so as to make them remember these things, no matter how difficult and boring he finds this to be. Gentleness is a virtue which inspires us with goodness, sensitivity, and tenderness. Jesus Christ is the most accomplished model of this virtue. He recommends it to us, especially by these words, "Learn of me, for I am gentle and humble of heart." Matthew 9:29. In general, we can distinguish four kinds of gentleness. The first is that of the mind, which consists in judging without harshness, without passion, without considering one's own merit and one's supposed superiority. The second is that of the heart, which makes us want things without being stubborn about it, and seeks them in a righteous manner. The third is that of manner, which consists in behaving according to good principles. The fourth is that of our conduct, which makes us act with simplicity and uprightness, not contradicting others without reasonable cause and without any obligation to do so, and observing, in this case, a reasonable degree of moderation. Zeal. In a teacher, zeal is a most excellent virtue, and it is for this reason, says St. John Chrysostom, that he who chastises his body by austerities has less merit than he who wins souls for God. St. Gregory on Ezekiel, Homily 2. Here, St. John Chrysostom adds that there is no sacrifice more agreeable to God than zeal. A zealous teacher instructs his pupils, in the first place, by his good example. This is the first lesson he gives, thus imitating Jesus Christ, who began by doing before teaching. In fact, he may wish to attain the proposed end, but he will do so only by the longest path if he is content with speaking. The shortest path is that of example. Next, he instructs by solid teaching. This is the second kind of instruction he gives his pupils, and the most important one it is, because he teaches them things they were ignorant of and which they need to know. Finally, he teaches by wise and moderate corrections, moderate in manner. Piety. A teacher should possess the virtue of piety in an eminent degree. That is, his piety should be both interior and sincere, for otherwise he would be only a hypocrite. It should also be outward and exemplary, because he should show exteriorly the sentiments which fill his heart. Generosity is a virtue which makes us sacrifice voluntarily our personal interests to those of our neighbor, conformably to the example of St. Paul, who said that he did not seek what is profitable to myself, but to many, that they may be saved. 1 Corinthians 10:33. The teacher devotes himself, not momentarily, but for life, to a diaconia, a service, most honorable in itself, no doubt, but also very laborious and very tedious for nature, and which, far from appearing honorable in the eyes of men, seems to them on the contrary commonplace and lowly. Nevertheless, the teacher considers it as the sole object worthy of his labors, of his continual application, of his cares and study, and what he prepares to himself is to make his students derive all the benefit from his efforts, so that he can say to them, with the apostle, "For myself, I most gladly will spend and be spent for your souls." 2 Corinthians 12:15. How many virtues does generosity not give rise to? A little bit more on generosity. It is as noble as magnanimity. It is as useful as beneficence. It is as tender as humanity. It seeks to make others happy, whether by instructions, or by advice, or by good example. It procures for them all the help it can. It takes pity on their weakness. To acquire the virtue of generosity, the teacher must prize his task. He should carry it out with affection, without neglecting anything. He should love to be of service to his students and to do for them all the good he can.
Lord.
Dear friends, I would like to now turn the discussion on the third of the substances of the triadic cantor, that is, a psychagogos. Father Romanos, would you please offer us your insights into this aspect?
Thank you very much, Nick, for inviting me to this exceptional podcast. Please allow me to wish you and the listeners a blessed new ecclesiastical year. Before I answer your question, let me offer just one comment on one of the questions you asked George, which he answered beautifully. The question regarding whether the Psaltis should chant in what you call the pietistic manner or in a festive manner. I think the response is found in the hymnology itself. Δεύτε άπαντες πανηγυρίσομεν. Let us all celebrate. Δεύτε πιστοί εφρανθόμεν εν Theos. Let us all faithful rejoice, right? So there is joy, there is celebration, there is festivity, but en Theos, in a godly manner. So there is this balance. And one more quick comment on this, specifically in the Divine Liturgy, which is the center of our life as Christians and the center of our ministry as cantors, Metropolitan Methodists of Boston like to say that the Divine Liturgy is a γλέντι. Η Θεία Λειτουργία είναι γλέντι. It's a feast. It must be joyful. So there is, there are different kinds of chanting. Of course, our attitude, the way we perform, the particular thesis we will choose will be different depending on whether we're chanting a funeral or an Orthodox service or a Vesperal service. But in general, yes, chanting is celebratory by default because we always celebrate the resurrection of Christ. Anyways, that was my 2 cents on that question. Now, let me talk about what you asked me. The Psaltis says psychagogos. Now, unlike George's contribution, which was very clear and practical, my contribution will be more theoretical, more theological, and hopefully I will not bore you and the listeners. So, the Psaltis says psychagogos, and the Psaltic card is psychagogia. Now, the Greek word psychagogos and its derivative psychagogia are usually translated as entertainer and entertainment, respectively. So when I say the Psaltis says psychagogos and the Psaltic card as psychagogia, one could loosely translate it as the cantor as entertainer and the art of chanting as entertainment, right? But this would thoroughly miss the point because the original meaning of psychagogos is very different. The word is derived from the noun psyche, soul, and the verb ago, to lead or to guide. So psychagogos literally means the guide of souls, the one that guides souls unto better, higher things. This is precisely the true function of the Psaltis and his art. It is to guide the souls of the faithful Orthodox Christians to better things. And what are these better things? and by what road does the Psaltis and his art lead to them? Okay? There are three such roads. Okay? One road I call horizontal and intertemporal. The second one is horizontal and interspatial. And the third one is vertical. All right, as I said in the beginning, this sounds very theoretical and maybe convoluted, but try to imagine the Psaltic art as having the shape of a cross, and actually a three-dimensional cross. Okay? The cross of Christ, we know it from the theology, unites the heavens with the earth. But even in its physical manifestation on earth, it stands in a conspicuous place, historically on Golgotha, outside of the gate of the city of Jerusalem. And today, on top of the dome of the churches, on top of the beautiful gate in the churches, so that it can be seen by all and embrace everyone and everything. The Psaltis also stands in a conspicuous place in the church. Okay? In Byzantine times, on the ambo. Nowadays, at the analogion or chant stand. Okay? So he or she is seen by all. He or she embraces all the faithful and expresses in sacred song everything in them. Their hopes, their failures, their sins, their repentance. Okay, so I talked about three roads, right? First, I mentioned the horizontal and intertemporal road. What do I mean by this? I mean that the Psaltic art guides the minds and hearts of the faithful back in time and also forward in time. And as such, it unites them with the departed and the ones to come, the future generations. How so? Well, it leads the mind to the Ottoman period, during which the enslaved Orthodox Greeks learned their language and preserved their customs and traditions by studying what? The Psalter and the Oktoichos, the two basic books of the chant stand. Okay? It also leads the mind even further back to the age of imperial glory and ascetic struggles, the age when the masterpieces of Christian hymnography were composed and chanted for the first time. Masterpieces such as Saint Romanos the Melodist's Kontakia, or Saint John of Damascus's and Saint Andrew of Crete's canons, as well as the ancient simple hymns like Christos Anesti, Christ is risen, or Tes Presvies tis Theotokou, through the intercessions of the Theotokos, or Soson imas ie Theou, save us, O Son of God. We do not know the composers of these hymns, but we know that all the faithful have been chanting them in practically the same manner for centuries. Also, the Psaltic art leads the mind even further back to the ancient Greeks, whose music had the same core essence and characteristics as Byzantine chant, as has been demonstrated by musicology, and also by the examination of ancient theoretical treatises by the Pythagoreans, Euclid of Alexandria, Aristoxenos, Aristides Stylianos, and many others. So this monophonic music, which in its most simple and unadorned fashion can be chanted by young and old, men and women, accomplished protopsalte like you, Nick, and like you, George, but also by novices, this type of music unites us with our ancestors, but also with the future generations, which will continue to praise God in the same fashion, hopefully. So this unity of generations, if I may borrow the phrase from the book of Genesis, in my opinion, is kalilian. It is very good. Okay? So this is the first road I mentioned. Now, the second road by which the Psaltis guides the soul with his or her art is the one that I called horizontal and interspatial. Okay, the first one was intertemporal, it had to do with time. This one had to do with space. Better yet, interspatial and interpersonal. What do I mean by this? Psalmody, as we saw, unites the faithful with the departed fathers and brothers and the future sons and daughters. But more importantly, it unites them with the contemporary fellow travelers to the kingdom of heaven, regardless of where on earth they are. Ενενή στόματι και μια καρδία, with one mouth and one heart, everybody together chants Kyrie eleison. Everybody together chants Ti permátho, or Σώσον Kyrie ton λαόν σου, or at least everybody together should chant. Okay? We all become one voice, one cry, one soul. Ultimately, we become one body, the body of Christ, the church. Now, the Psaltic card is primarily the liturgical vestment of the Greek sacred words, right? Because the same holy fathers and mothers that composed the words also composed the music. But because it is a sacred art, it is not and cannot be partial to language. Rather, it can serve equally well as a liturgical vestment of the sacred words in other languages. We have solid proof of this in the chanting of the Arabs, or the Romanians, or the Serbs, or the Bulgarians, and more recently, the chanting of the Americans. As you know, at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline, all the services are bilingual. Usually the right choir chants in Greek and the left choir chants in English. And yet, the worshiper is not distracted or confused, because the Psaltic art provides an aesthetic uniformity to the worship experience and unites the languages, the cultures, the backgrounds of all the worshipers. A few years ago, after the end of the Divine Liturgy at Holy Cross, I asked my mother-in-law, who was visiting from Greece, whether she was frustrated by the fact that she could not understand any of the words chanted by the left choir. And she said, not at all. I could not even tell they were not chanting in Greek. As long as it is Byzantine music, it feels like church and I can pray. So once again, we see that the Psaltic art, psychagogy, it guides the souls to unity and oneness of mind. And this is also very good. Καλό lian. The third road I mentioned in the beginning, by which the Psaltis leads the soul, is the vertical one. And this is the most significant one because it does not simply guide, it guides downward and upward. Let me explain. Downward. It guides the divine truths from heaven to earth, from the celestial spheres to the hearts of humans. The church considers all hymnology as being divinely inspired. And in fact, according to tradition, some hymns have an otherworldly origin. Hymns like Agios, 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 Holy, 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 which is chanted by the angels antiphonally around the throne of God, as was revealed in a vision to the prophet Isaiah. Or Axion Estinos Alithos, it is truly right. Okay, this is a hymn taught by an angel to an Athonite monk. Or Δόξα εν υψίστης της Θεό και πηγής ειρήνη, which we chant in every Orthodox service at the end. It's the beginning of the great doxology before the Divine Liturgy, right? The initial verse of the doxology, Δόξα εν υψίστης της Θεό, glory to God in the highest, was first sung by the angels when Christ was born in Bethlehem. Okay, so these hymns were literally composed and taught to men by angels. So we truly chant angelic music. So this is how the Psaltic art guides the divine truths from heaven to earth. This is the downward vertical road. Perhaps even more importantly, the Psaltic art guides upward. Okay? It guides the soul from earth to heaven. Yorgos talked about the Psaltis as a performer or as an artist, okay? And that's unambiguous, right? But chanting is not simply musical notes, scales, harmonies, rhythms, artistic beauty. It is all of that, but it is also prayer. Okay? It is a union of the creature with his creator. And this is why the Psaltic art is by its very nature simple, okay? Without unnecessary airs and graces, as Fotios Kondoglou used to say. It must be simple so as not to belong to the few that have specialized musical knowledge and skills, but rather to anyone that wishes to travel with it as a guide from earth to heaven. Okay, so once again, this is the ultimate goal of the Psaltic art, to guide souls to better, loftier, and more perfect things. Let me conclude by quoting Elder Timotheos Zanis. Elder Timotheos was a holy father from Crete who fell asleep in the Lord in 1991. So he's a modern day saint. He's not been canonized, but he's considered one of the holy elders of the 20th century. And he said this: the cantor who chants with the grace of God is captured by the Holy Spirit. He does not live in this world. He ascends to the heavens, and he imparts this grace to the entire congregation. If only we had eyes to see the rays of light that come out of the cantor's mouth and fall on the heads of the faithful. And let me mention one more thing, a quote by another contemporary saint, Elder Paisios the Athonite, who explains what it means for a cantor to chant with the grace of God. He says, what matters is reverence. Without reverence, chanting is flat. It sounds like an instrument that is out of tune, clink, clunk. And it doesn't matter whether one chants in a loud or a soft voice. What matters is to chant with reverence. Then soft chanting is humble, sweet. It isn't drowsy. And loud chanting is intense and heartfelt. It isn't harsh. Father Makarios Bouzikas had a thunderous voice, but he chanted naturally with reverence and longing. He made you feel that his heart lifted off and made your heart lift off too. An old monk used to say, it pierces your guts. Bottom line, this is the role of the Psaltis, to pierce your guts, to help you lay aside all earthly care, as we chant in the Cherubic hymn, and to ascend to heaven.
Όταν αιώνων ποιητής και δεσπότης, των όλων υπερουσιαιόντος, την ενιαυσίαν ευλόγησον περίοδον, σώζον το ελέησουν, το απείρο ικτήρμον, πάντας τους λατρεύοντας, σοι το μόνο δεσπότη, και εκφώντας φόβο λυτρωτά, έφρανον πάση το έτος χορήγησον.